Hey everyone, it's Jim
and Charles
from Mellow amps and
Valves and More.
In fact, this is Tube Lab number 227 and Mellow amps number 11, and it's basically the Phono release party. Though we don't have any party hats and there's no drinkies, but it's still part of the workday. So
We're definitely not being lazy and only making one video for both channels today.
Yeah. But first, caution everyone, electronics and tube amplifiers can have very high voltages present, which can be lethal. Exercise extreme caution when working around them. Always consult a professional technician when in doubt. Now, we've never done a video that both channels share, so we'll see how it goes. Basically, everyone's going to get the same first half. Then the MTA viewers will peel off and we'll be talking mostly directly to the test builders and future builders that are interested in the new Phono kit. And the rest of you from Valves and More, we're going to take a look and see what came in this week. So let's get started. So after months of work and a really intense day of work, the new universal kit Phono preamp is in the store, and if you've inquired about being a test builder, you probably are looking at an email right now with a link to the store, and we're going to be talking more about test builder information on the second half. But one of the we get a lot of correspondence from around the world in both stores, and in the Mellow amp store, one of the most common questions about the Rocket kit, which was the first modern line, and this is the second in the modern line, is how does it sound? And I almost take it for granted that everybody knows this sounds great. But of course that doesn't tell you anything. So it might help a little bit to talk about our design philosophy. First of all, we work in pure Class A. Now, what does pure mean? Pure means no feedback. And Class A, well, Class A is the gold standard for pretty much any circuit that's amplifying. It essentially means that the gain stage is up and running 100% of the time, and there is no chance of phase distortion because there's no other gain stage operating adjacent to it. So let's say a push-pull stage, a Class AB, or God help us, a Class D, which is basically a high-speed switching amplifier. And when you're listening to a movie, and we'll watch a show later in the evening most days. A Class D home amplifier, 5-channel or 7-channel or whatever we're up to now. I think ours is 7 channels. And a good Class D design is fine. It can cope with the kind of dynamics. You're not really critically listening to every nuance of every footstep in the film.
And you're probably going to be limited by the content anyway.
Yeah. But when you're at home and you're listening to one of your favorite albums, you've got a nice little beverage beside you, the curtains are drawn, or in our case, if you have a roller blind is down, it's very peaceful, you're trying to chill out, you're closing your eyes, and you're just listening to the entire soundscape in front of you. You hear every little nuance in a high definition system. And Class A absolutely will rock you. If you've never actually heard pure Class A, if your amplifiers are Class D, which is really common, Class C amplifiers essentially save money. That's what they do. They give you a lot of power in a smaller box, and they save money. They save money for the manufacturer, they save money for the purchaser.
It's the same reason for Class AB. You're trying to get more power out of less tubes, although in that case it is more tubes.
Yeah, but it's the way of getting power tubes to generate their maximum output. So now in preamps, especially tube preamps, it's relatively easy to operate in pure Class A, but a lot of manufacturers don't, or they operate in hybrid designs in which they've got solid state circuitry mixed up with the tubes. So there's none of that in here. The Phono kit is called a universal because it's designed to allow you to roll the 6-volt version of the 6SL7 or the 12-volt version, which is the 12SL7. And the cathode follower is the best unknown vintage tube, I think, ever. And that's the 6N6P. And there's really only a couple of versions of that. Almost all of the existing inventory was made by NEVZ in the former Soviet Union, and they are just, the manufacturing tightness of those tubes is just stunning. With a lot of vintage tubes, even high quality ones, will find variations between periods of manufacturing. Even in case lots we'll find variations, not with these things. They're all made good. And
except for whenever you get into near the end of the Soviet Union, then everything kind of gets a little wonky, but actually still not too bad.
Yeah, well, our cutoff date for purchasing Soviet era tubes is about 1989. We prefer to be in the 60s and 70s, but anywhere in the mid 80s is fine. So what a universal preamp gives you is a lot of flexibility, because basically any 6SL or 12SL7 tube ever made can be rolled in here. And all you have to do is change your switch mode power supply. So you would have a 6-volt or a 12-volt switch mode. There's a separate entrance here at the back for it, beside the main IEC cord. And yeah, so I think we're still talking about how it sounds. We're coming full circle. So pure Class A is clarity. Above all else, it's clarity.
And if there is any added distortion, it's in the even harmonics, mainly the second harmonic, and other forms of amplifiers tend to add odd harmonics, which are grating, difficult to listen to. So this does add a little bit of warmth to it, but it does have great clarity.
Yeah, I mean, the natural warmth that comes from the 6SL7 makes the preamp musical. And if there's one thing that warms the heart of an audio designer more than any other reviewer comment you could possibly imagine, besides, this is the cheapest, bestest, greatest thing I've ever seen.
And it sounds okay.
Yeah, it's when we got initial feedback on the Classic Line version. This is based on the circuit of the Classic Line. It's a bit of a modification, so I would call it a Mark II version. But musical is what the reviewers kept saying, one after another. And I said, yeah, that's spot on. That's exactly how we felt about it. It's what we were trying to make. The biggest single problem with playing records these days is that the 99% of the phono preamps out there many of them sound awful, but all of them sound flat and lifeless. So it doesn't matter how good a record you've got, you've chosen the pressing really carefully based on reviews, you put it through 2 high gain stages of a very neutral, flat sounding preamp, and on the other side, that great musical record all of a sudden sounds, like the worst CD you've ever heard.
And that's assuming you haven't put it through something digital or added some feedback to it, which is actually really common with a lot of our AA equalization stages. And this uses none of that.
Yeah, it's a passive equalization stage, and we did a lot of experimenting when we developed the classic line, and we thought that the solution to the bass problem and creating a great sounding EQ, EQ just stands for equalization, right? So everybody knows that records are basically encoded, and we have to restore the frequencies to their correct position. when we bring the signal from the turntable cartridge through the phono preamp. So the phono preamp does two things. It has to have a lot of gain, huge amounts of gain, because the signal off of a phono cartridge is very, very low, roughly 5 millivolts, so 5/1000ths of a volt RMS, and it has to restore the equalization. So when we were doing our initial experiments years ago now, we just didn't like the feedback circuits. They're fiddly to work with, they just weren't sounding good, and I said, okay, let's go further back in time to the original RCA circuit, which was a passive circuit. And that's when the magic started to happen. And I said, okay, there's no feedback. Right away, that explains a lot of why we like the sound of this. And there's a minimal amount of intrusion. Now, it also takes a lot of gain to work with that passive circuit. So the 6SL7 just gets us there. But it gets us there, and that's all that really matters. So at this point, we're gonna break. Half of us are going to head, well actually thousands of us are going to head into the lab, and we'll see what's come in. And the other half are going to talk a little bit about the test builders and how the new store listing is arranged, and just give you a hand checking out. Okay, through the magic of editing, we're back. And we haven't actually moved our butts even an inch, at least I hope we haven't. So this is for test builders who are into, are really getting revved up, and quite a few of you are. I've been getting correspondence from people, is it ready?
I think this is actually the best response that we've had to any of our amplifiers to date for people wanting to be test builders.
Yeah, I shut down taking names for test builders, I think at 10. And we only really need 5. But there's so much interest in getting a good sounding phono preamp into your system that I think we're just going to open up the door to anybody who put their name in as a test builder, and whoever wants one, we're just going to, it'll be a big week of shipping. So that reminds me, it's going to take us about, if the orders come in this weekend, we'll probably be shipping on Friday, so a week today. It's just going to take a while. There's just going to be so much to do. But the store listing is up, and a couple of things. So there's an operating manual that's available as a PDF. Make sure that you check beside it, there's a download for the addendum. The addendum is always the most current, up-to-date revision sheet. And if you download it right now, you'll see it just says, always check. There are no revisions, because at the moment we haven't got any feedback from test builders, and the build series isn't quite finished, but I would say we're about 3/4 of the way through. In fact, we've already started talking about what our first test track's going to be.
Here's the build right here, actually. Looking pretty cool.
Yeah, and while we're looking at the build, Charles invented a kind of board standoff system that will allow you to work quicker and faster.
That's these guys right here. And they came out of a development to help us actually manufacture pre-built kits and sort of stack the boards while we're working on them. So this is a new version of that, just to help our builders. So you can do this. Flip over easily, work on the other side. If you need to get on something on both sides, you can easily prop it around. And they're just super easy to reposition if you need to get to something. So they're going to be in the store too.
Yeah, if you've been watching the build series, you've been watching actually the commercial version that we use when we're manufacturing completed amps. And I was amazed. They worked so well in the construction of the production run Charles did, and then in the build series, it just made it so much easier. So they're in the store under accessories, and they're not expensive for a set of 4. You don't have to have them. So if you've got another kind of a stand you like to use, or your methodology is different, then don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. Now the other thing you're going to need is the filament supply for these tubes is split. So the 6N6P uses the main transformer secondary winding, which is a 6-volt supply. So there's nothing to do with that. You'll build and wire it up correctly.
But you never have to worry about it. It turns on whenever you turn the amp on.
You're always going to have a 6N6P in V3 as far as I'm concerned. It's just the greatest sounding cathode follower I've ever heard. But depending on whether you're going to run a 6-volt or a 12-volt tube, you're going to have to decide. A lot of our customers in the classic line just own a 6-volt and a 12-volt switch mode. They're not that expensive. You might have them at home already if you're a returning customer.
And a lot of networking equipment use 12-volt supplies too. So chances are you've got one floating around from an old router or something, and if you have it, then you're good.
Yeah, just be careful though. There is a lot of junk out there. In fact, quite a few years ago now, we actually had to throw out an entire case, so 100 units.
Of very noisy power supplies.
Yeah, we just couldn't fix them, unfortunately. And that was just a disaster. So a noisy DC supply is just as bad or maybe even worse because there's no real filtering in the design of a lot of amps. So
we actually have a little bit here, but not enough to make up for a really bad power supply.
Yeah. So we will be shipping test builders this tube here actually, the late production Sylvania 12 SL7. So you will need a 12-volt switch mode for it. And last night I selected tubes from a huge bag and made up matches and did some listening tests. And I was floored by how good it sounded. And we have a lot of great sounding 6SL and 12SL7 tubes. And I thought, we're going to get people complaining that, why did you send the best tube ever? And the truth of the matter is there are a lot of really great sounding 6SL7s and 12SL7s. Mm-hmm. Sylvania themselves made at least 4, maybe 5 different kinds.
And probably double that if you include the Lochtel versions of the same tube, and some Lochtel versions that don't actually have a comparable one in octal format.
Yeah, and we even have the first generation that go back to the late 1930s as Lochtels, and we will be getting them into the store and rebasing them. So yeah, and also the switch mode will need a power cord. You might have, and it doesn't need a grounded power cord, an IUC cord, but if you do use an ungrounded power cord, make sure you put a tag on the business end that you plug into the amp, so that you never accidentally put an ungrounded IUC cord onto a piece of equipment that really, for safety reasons, needs to have its safety ground connected.
And that's not for the amp. That is for the switch mode only.
Yeah, and these are not expensive. So if you need one, now the whole reason why we don't put things like power cords into the store is just simply an environmental choice. A lot of people have power cords lying around and they can just repurpose them. If you need a good power cord, we actually buy direct from a manufacturer. They're not expensive. This is a medium duty cord, which is totally perfect for any of our preamps. We actually have a heavy duty version. I forget the gauge of it, but it is
thick.
It's a beast. Now, our manufacturer uses an extra fine stranded wire, so these actually are fairly flexible, which is nice. I don't like stiff power cords. Anyways, they're all under the accessories. So, and you don't need to order a printed manual if you don't want one. We actually invested in a high-quality business printer, a high-quality colored laser printer. So, and we're printing on high-quality paper. So, if you want a really good printed copy, we'll, for a small amount of money, we'll print one and send it off to you. Otherwise, just download the PDF. And the manual is amazing. We built upon the manual that we did for the Rocket, which was the first kind of unified manual. Up until then, it was sort of a collection of information that was available. So, like all of our kits, there's a complete set of specifications, and and the noise floor is 60 dB down at 1 kilohertz. So the signal to noise ratio is 60 dB, and that is the beginnings of what I would call a quiet piece of equipment. But, and this is a big but, there's no such thing as a super quiet tube phono preamp if you were to compare it to any well-built or well-designed and built solid-state phono preamp. And the simple reason is the gain is just, it's staggering how much gain there is. The finished gain, not counting
the signal you lose at the interstage RIAA equalization circuit.
So the finished gain, if you put, the finished gain is 194.6. That's the net gain.
So if you have any noise coming in on that signal input, it's being multiplied by almost 195 times.
Yeah. So, so it's insane. Now the noise floor is totally perfect should be perfect for everybody, including fairly high efficiency speakers. But just be aware that you're going to have a higher noise floor than you're used to if you're running solid state. It's just in fact, Shit released a new phono preamp just, I think, last week, maybe, and it's, I think it's 3 times the price of this unit. Now you have to build this. So, but anyways, and
they put the same warning on.
They put the same warning in there. So yeah. So Charles did a really great RIAA graph. It shows the ideal. It shows the actual plot. So we swept the unit frequency by frequency and did a very highly accurate plot, and then it shows the equalized signal, and so I find it fascinating. There's also a full sweep and full schematics. So like all of our kits, we make public the complete schematics. We don't hide anything. So there are people out there that, they don't have a lot of cash and they want great sounding audio gear. So they scrounge and they look for a schematic to build. So people are welcome to build our schematic. We can't provide support. And we're just way too busy to provide support, but you're welcome to download the schematic and build it yourself if you want. And
actually on that note, we've been discussing possibly releasing just the PCBs. If any of you want to build something like this from almost scratch, but want something to build it on top of, let us know if you'd be interested. We'd like to hear your feedback on it. We're not sure if anybody is really interested in that sort of thing.
In the past with the classic line, the PCBs were very inexpensive, and after a product had sort of become a legacy product and had a few years in the store, we would release the PCB to the general public, and we've been selling more and more of those little PCBs for very reasonable money. The bigger PCBs have a lot of development time, a lot of work, and of course they're a lot more expensive to buy, so they will be more expensive. But I think given the economic times and how many people are getting into higher end audio that really want audiophile sound, and that's what we're talking about, and just don't have the money. I think we're going to try and help people out and start releasing mainline PCBs for newer kits fairly quickly after the kits themselves come out. So anyways, if anybody has any questions, absolutely drop it into the comments, and we're really looking forward to hearing back from test builders, and of course the reviews that come in. That's a big part of why test builders are so important. First of all, if we make a really stupid mistake in the design, they'll catch it.
Yeah, just like they did with the rocket.
We've only ever done that.
Got it fixed.
We've only ever done it once, but we'll never forget it. And they help with the parts inventory. Hey Jim, couldn't you have just put a little bit more of this or that? And we try hard to make sure that there's extra of everything, but mistakes happen. And test builders often come up with innovative, should I say it the British way? innovative. Is that how they say it? Anyways.
Methods for doing parts installs, and sometimes they teach us things, which is really useful. We can pass it on to you guys.
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the things that they brought to us with the rocket that was a great idea was people were having a little bit of trouble aligning the top plate and the bottom plate screws. They basically go on right near the end of the assembly. And a gentleman sent us a note, and he said, well, if you just leave the sub-assembly, the sides and the back fasteners just a little bit loose, it just gives you a little bit of wiggle room. And then once everything's together, you tighten it up.
So we tried it out and it works great.
So it was a great idea. So we always, test builders always bring things to the kits that improve them and help us improve the future kits. So a big shout out to test builders. Over the years, they've just been fantastic. And that reminds me, test builders are going to get a complete free set of tubes. And this time around, it's a fairly big value. I think I added it up. It's $180 worth of tubes. So, and they're going to be tightly matched. We never send out, well, I never send out bad tubes to anybody. But test builders get the best tubes that we can find enough of, anyways. So, and so a big thank you to test builders.
And we're looking forward to hearing back from all of you guys with some great feedback and reviews, and hopefully a lot of comments about how great this thing sounds.
Well, this is Jim.
And Charles.
Signing off. Keep building, everyone.